What's up everyone, John Brettinger from Techno Buffalo here with a full review for you of the Samsung Galaxy Mega 6.3, and this thing is totally mega. Let's go ahead and see if it's too big or just the right size, or if you're looking for a phablet style phone, check out if it's the right one for you. Let's get started. So you ever looked at your Galaxy Note 2 and said, man, that screen's too small for me? Well, Samsung's got your answer with a product I'm not sure who asked for. This is the Galaxy Mega 6.3, and it's named 6.3 because the screen is 6.3 inches. This is a ginormous phone. So let me go ahead and give my disclaimers I usually do before I do any sort of review. So I use this phone as my giant daily driver for the better part of 8 days. The only phone I used, I got to know it inside and out. When you see the hands-on and see how I use it to try and figure out sort of a reference point. I have pretty large hands. I can palm a basketball, so might not be how it's going to look in your hands, but just sort of something to keep in mind as you look at this thing and you're like, maybe I could use it, maybe I couldn't use it. Hopefully that will help. That's before we get to all the specs and talk about the screen size, let's talk about call quality. Call quality was pretty decent and pretty on par with other Samsung devices. I didn't have any drop calls. I tested it on AT&T's HSPA Plus network. It's an unlocked device, so all this is only reflective of how it worked on that particular network. It was not tested on T-Mobile, but it worked well. Speakerphone wasn't overly loud, so if you rely on that for making phone calls wherever you are, you might want to pick up an external device. It was kind of tinny as well, but other than that, very serviceable, worked well, it pulled in a pretty strong signal. No issue between network switch offs, so between HSPA Plus and HSPA, and sometimes down to Edge. No drop call issues there at all. Samsung really knows what they're doing when it comes to their antennas and making the phones just work. Alright, so in case you forgot what the Galaxy Mega 6.3 is rocking, let me go ahead and remind you. So of course, 6.3 inch screen, it is a 720p display. It's running Android 4.2, so one of the few phones actually has 4.2 on board. Being powered by a 1.7 gigahertz dual core processor, so only 2 cores found in this ginormous phone. 1.5 gigs of RAM, be available in 2 configurations, either with 8 gigs of internal storage or 16. Ours has the 8. You can expand it, of course, with micro SD card, no issue there at all. Cameras, got an 8 megapixel sensor on the back, and on the front, there lives a sort of oddly megapixel to 1.9 megapixel sensor. Wi-Fi, all the latest is here, including 802.11 ABG and AC, so you're future-proofed, at least from the Wi-Fi standard. You've got NFC on here as well, and a pretty giant 3200 milliamp hour battery, keeping this guy juiced. We'll talk about the battery life a little further on in the review. Let's begin with the screen, and I am not going to knock this for having a gigantic screen, so that's what you're buying the phone for. Anybody who reviews this phone and says, hey, the screen is ridiculous, you shouldn't use it, it just doesn't seem right. You're buying this phone because of a 6.3 inch screen, so I'm not really going to factor that into the full review. I'll talk about the size of it a little bit, but it's a big screen, and you know if you're buying this phone, you want a phone with a ginormous screen. Let's start with the good. It looks really awesome. For a 720p screen, everything looks beautiful. In fact, I had to go look up the specs to make sure it didn't have a 1080p screen on it. I was a little worried the pixels were so big on a screen this size, but really no issue at all. The screen was beautiful. Samsung really nails it here. Tough to see in direct sunlight, but in indoors, pictures, video, everything just absolutely pops. Text looks awesome, especially on a screen this size. Things are able to look really big. They did a wonderful job with the screen. Didn't even miss having 1080 on it at all. 720 with Samsung technology really worked well. So continuing the good, the phone is so big that I hardly even use my tablet. If you're saying, okay, I only have enough money to get one thing, I don't know if I want a new phone or I want to get a tablet, this might be a pretty decent option. I really didn't use my iPad mini at all, which I use several times a day. This thing was plenty big enough. All right, so now on to the bad. When you hold this phone up to your head, you got to align that there speaker with that there ear, and because the phone is so wide, it was really hard to find exactly where that was. So I have tough time. I had to keep moving it around, and obviously the audio quality didn't sound so good until I found that sweet spot. And also because it's so big, the phone almost creates an echo. So when your voice comes out of your mouth hole to reflecting on this phone and coming back, you sort of hear it, which is very strange for a phone. So something to definitely keep in mind. So the other big question with a phone of this size is, how does it fit in your pocket? How can I possibly carry a 6.3 inch phone? So I don't know how else to describe it, but I wear regular dude jeans. I don't wear skinny jeans. They're not like giant 1990s pants either. They're just regular dude jeans, able to fit in my pocket, no problem. I could walk around without really even noticing it. Where I ran into a problem though was when I had to sit down. That's when it got really tight, and I was very aware that I had this huge phone in my pocket. I had to keep taking it out when I sat down and put it on the table. If you're the kind of person who takes your phone and keys out of your pocket anyway, then no big deal at all. But if you keep your phone in your pocket all the time, you're really gonna wanna try this at a store. If you don't wanna get arrested though, don't put the phone in your pocket at the store. They evidently don't like that. So obviously in my line of work, I get the opportunity and the privilege to test a ton of phones. I have never had so many people stop and ask me questions ever as they did with this guy. People are like, why are you making calls on a tablet? To what is that? Is that the new Galaxy Note? People were just crazy curious about what this thing was. And since it hasn't come out in the US yet, I was very happy to share, but I've never had anybody stop me as often as I did with the Galaxy Mega. So if you like attention, might be a reason to pick this sucker up. So software-wise, there's a lot of Galaxy S4 features on here. AirView is on here. I actually found myself liking TouchWiz on a screen this big. Admittedly, I'm not the biggest TouchWiz fan, but I did not install a launcher on this guy. I used it as is, as Samsung intended, and I kind of liked it. I don't know what it was about seeing it bigger, but it worked for me and I really enjoyed it. So I know that's a personal thing, but if you're always sort of first thing you do is put a launcher on it, you might want to reconsider when you pick up the Galaxy Mega. So battery life, giant screen, you might have some concerns. 3200 milliamp hours are easily going to get you through a full day. My usage off the charger around 7:30, 2 emails being pulled in on Wi-Fi most of the day, an hour or so of phone calls, some games, some video viewing, more web browsing than I usually do on a phone because the screen is so big and it just lends itself to scrolling through and through and through pages. I was able to put it on the phone at night around 11:30 with almost 50% charge. The battery is incredible on this, whether it's having a huge battery or Samsung has done battery management on here. No problem at all getting through one day, and if you're careful, you can probably even get through 2 days. And I don't do any auto brightness. I keep my brightness generally around 80%. So I'm sure if I put that down, to 40 or lower, that I could have probably gotten through much longer without any issue at all. So I was very pleasantly surprised from a battery standpoint. So on to performance, it was adequate. I did have some slowdown when I was doing very quick scrolls through pages. Apps loaded fine, they played fine. The phone just didn't feel as zippy as other devices. And I've been testing a lot of quad core, even some octa-core phones. So yeah, it might have already been in my head, but it's not a fast phone. It's a very serviceable phone. It works well, apps load quick enough, but it's not a phone where you're like, wow, I can't believe how fast that opens. Or wow, I can have so many apps running at once. And you can, but you are gonna have some sort of slowdown. You might have to do some app management, but that's the trade-off for having a phone this big, I suppose. And there really aren't any other options here. So nothing with quad core or octa-core out there yet. Perhaps the Galaxy Mega 6.32 will have that. But at least right now you're left with dual core, which in the Android world might be not quite enough to get you the performance that you need. All right, so what's the conclusion on the Mega 6.3? There's clearly a market for it. I like big screen phones. My wife, who has never once used an Android device, ever expressed any desire to use a phone other than an iPhone, saw this and said, when you're done with it, can I use it? She couldn't believe that she could see everything on the screen, and she doesn't care if it's in her pocket because it goes right in her purse. So there's clearly people that want this phone. I love giant screen phones, but for me, the 6.3 inches is just a little too big. I think 5.5 to 6 inches probably be the biggest that I could go. But if you want something a little larger, this is here, it's here now, it's available, and it works. So if you're the kind of person that says, listen, I want the biggest, I only want one phone, I don't want a tablet as well, it's a really good choice. This gets a very solid 8 on the Techno Buffalo rating scale. So you guys agree, disagree? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave them in the comments down below. Please give the video a thumbs up. We most definitely appreciate it. I'm John Renger from Techno Buffalo. I'll see you next video.